This is episode 446.
Clearly, we have virtually doubled our valuation in a year. Revenue growth and EPS, earnings per share growth, is the most important metric which I virtually look at every day to see whether the revenue forecast and how we are going to close the quarter. There are other metrics naturally across the organization which are equally important, are important, but the final number or the final metric is the revenue growth or the revenue number and the EPS number for the quarter.
From Middle Market Media, this is CFO Thought Leader, where we speak to finance leaders about driving change within their organizations. Hello, we're speaking to the CFO of Mphasis, a billion-dollar IT services company that today counts Blackstone as its largest investor. Mphasis is a global player, but U.S. customers today are responsible for 80% of its sales. We speak to the CFO of Mphasis, who prefers to be referred to using a shortened version of the last name, Suryanarayanan. Our interview with Surya begins after these words from our sponsor. Many accounting and finance professionals are facing a sizable obstacle these days. In this age of data enlightenment, their financial close processes leave no time for data analysis, the very activity that opens the door to new opportunities and career advancement. Blackline has the answer. By automating, centralizing, and streamlining financial close operations, Blackline customer organizations are now ready for the data-centric world, allowing their finance and accounting professionals to open the door to new opportunities. To learn more, visit blackline.com/CFO. Hello, we're speaking to Surya, CFO of Mphasis. Turn back the clock to 2016, and Blackstone Private Equity acquired Hewlett-Packard Enterprise's majority stake in Mphasis. The deal represented the largest technology investment as well as largest acquisition by Blackstone in India. Surya, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you with us, Surya. As usual, we begin by asking our guests to look back for us and tell us a little bit about themselves and what were those career experiences they feel prepared them to be a CFO. What comes to mind when I ask you that question?
Really, to give a little background of the career milestones, I'm basically a chartered accountant akin to a CPA in U.S. After I qualified, I joined Escorts Limited, which was a conglomerate in way back in the manufacturing sector in India. And as a policy, they inducted fresh finance professionals into internal audit, and so to give a good base to the finance professionals. So just after a year of my stint in internal audit, my reports reached the managing director, and he was quite impressed with those reports, and he inducted me into the office. This gave me a very good insight on to the working of a business leader, a CEO. And this was a pretty huge organization of more than 50 to 75,000 workforce. And that really gave me a good grounding in the finance. I'll also, also talk about how I became a CFO, and after this first stint in the 5 years in a company, I got selected as a CFO for another manufacturing company, and I was just 30 years. This certainly put me into a little, a position where I had to learn fast, and especially when you're dealing with business leaders and the CEO, you need to equip yourself and keep abreast with the development. So it certainly made me, this role change made me learn faster than I would have for any particular normal finance professional.
Can I interrupt here just for a second?
Sure.
Forgive me, Surya. I just want to point out you're only 30 years of age when you take over that finance leadership role. Can you tell us something about that organization? How large was it Ramco Systems? Can you tell us how large an organization that was?
Yes. So that organization, to start with, let me just give you a background of the company. It was an ERP product company. It was virtually the only product company in India at that point of time of that size. It was around 50 to 75 million. But more importantly, it had operations globally in Europe, US, and the Far East. And it was competing with the likes of SAP and BAN at that point of time. So it was a unique company from an Indian corporate perspective, and it was quite challenging because we were spending a lot of money in the product development, and the revenues were coming in at a much slower pace.
Can I ask, what allowed you? I believe your technical knowledge was established, and you had demonstrated it, as you revealed to us. How did you demonstrate the leadership qualities that someone thought Surya is ready? He's ready to be a leader.
So I think this, I feel, is virtually to my mantra of success. It may not work for everyone, but it worked very well for me. As you said rightly, technical knowledge is, of course, the rudimentary requirement to succeed. That goes without saying. I'm talking about domain knowledge, etc. But I thought what really helped me was my little outgoing type in interacting with other peers in the organization, and to getting their confidence, with the result. I would call like a business enabler, which helped me in my role as a CFO. Instead of the normal, typical finance professional or a CFO trying to put roadblocks in the progress, saying this, as per rule book, this is not okay, and that's by trying to give a solution so that the business leader and finally the overall organization can succeed. I think that is really an important characteristic a CFO needs to have to succeed.
Now, the next chapter of your career, in my mind, is when, it involves some global brands. Not that Ramco wasn't global in that time, but AIG Systems, Deutsche Bank. These are companies that, of course, we know well today. And can you tell us how your professional life intersected into that world?
Yes. So after Ramco Systems, I got a good opportunity as a CFO of Deutsche Bank captive in India. And it was very interesting. It was growing at a CAGR of nearly 20% as Deutsche Bank was universally, globally growing. We had very interesting, plans for the company, and the what happened is the Deutsche Bank at a point of time decided to sell their non-core assets, and this became one on the chopping block. And very interestingly, the decision made was only shared with the CEO and the CFO, that is me. And I had to conduct the whole transaction with the ultimate buyer single-handedly. The transaction went very smooth, and in fact, I was the only person across the organization who was, given a bonus by Deutsche Bank Frankfurt for managing this transaction. After that, I joined the CFO as a captive, AIG captive. I was virtually the first employee in that organization. And here again, I had multiple roles, right from real estate to IT, and virtually other than operations. And the organization grew very well. We were, as AIG is a global brand, we had work. We were doing work for across the AIG entities worldwide. We had in the board very senior execs from AIG. In fact, the CIO of the AIG was the chairman. So that gave me a lot of exposure in managing the board and the expectations of the board members. However, after 7 years, in 2008, after the meltdown, AIG had to sell off this, and that's where the company where I'm now, Emphasis, acquired AIG, and I moved to Emphasis.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for helping closing the circle there. I wasn't certain about the history. When did HP become an investor? And we know that, as I mentioned at the start of the podcast, Blackstone, of course, acquires HP's investment in it. But when did HP become part of the mix for a while?
So when I joined Emphasis, it was already owned by HP. In fact, going back on Emphasis, EDS, which was one of the largest IT services company, acquired Emphasis in 2006-07. EDS then got acquired by HP in 2007-08, and in the process, Emphasis became a subsidiary of HP in 2007-08.
Surya, I want to ask you this question that I've most recently posed to a number of CFOs from the technology corridor outside Boston or around Boston. And many of them have built their career just in that region. And they have been involved in technology companies for, decades. So, of course, my question is I have to believe there was a point in time where a recruiter knocked on the door and tried to relocate them to some other technology market. Silicon Valley comes to mind. But they said no. And, often they say no for a mix of personal or professional reasons. I want to ask you that similar question. I'm certain there are opportunities for you in other parts of the world at times, but, and forgive me if I'm wrong about this, but it looks like you continue to build your career in India. Curious how your decision-making worked as it related to your career and your decision to build it in India, continue to build it in India. And by the way, the Boston CFOs were very defensive. We have learned all sorts of wonderful things about Boston every time I pose this question.
Yes, so I did get, as you said, some offers from global offers. But I think what really spoiled me was becoming a CFO at a very young age. So I did not want to leave a CFO position. And globally, it was difficult to get a CFO position virtually from India. You may have to get into an organization and build your career there and become a CFO. So that maybe was, to some extent, a sort of a mind block or mental block from my side in accepting those offers. There were large companies where I got offers, but again, it would have not been a CFO position, and that was really, prevented me from taking up that role.
In fact, how many years then have you been with the Emphasis organization to date? And I think this is interesting because it's somewhat uncommon when you look at CFO tenure averages.
So I've been in Emphasis for the last 9 years.
9 years solid. Okay. This company has evolved over that period. And can you tell us a little bit about its competitive footing, the offerings it has today, and why Emphasis is competitive today?
Sure. Emphasis, as I mentioned, is a $1 billion plus IT services company, focusing predominantly on the BFSI segment and with large clients in the U.S. I think some of the important, or shall we say, differentiators of Emphasis is one, very focused on the BFSI segment, and with the result, we have long tenured clients which are 10 to 15 years. And here we are talking about clients who are Fortune 100 clients. So that gives us a lot of credibility in the market of our position as a very reliable IT services vendor. I think it's very important to stress the fact when you are identified an IT services vendor, especially for a Fortune 100, they look at a lot of reliability in terms of delivery, timely deliveryness, sticking to SLAs. So these are important aspects. And more importantly, what is required, the clients look for, is whether you can enable them to go into the next, shall we say, stage of solutions. And that is where we have, to a large extent, excelled, irrespective of the fact that we are not, shall we say, in terms of the size, as big as Accenture or IBM. But we always proved ourselves by offering digital solutions in virtually the last 3 years or so, more specific. And that is where the lot of spending is happening by these companies so that they can stay ahead of their competition. And we also we have focused on technology more than just offering bodies for work. And we have a mantra called bringing T back in IT, because we find that over a period of time, the technology aspect in the IT services world to a large extent was missing. And we always, when we interact with clients, either new or existing, we try to bring the technology angle to the solution, and that really impresses our clients.
I mean, you mentioned how you're competing against Accenture and IBM today. They have quite a extensive knowledge in all sorts of verticals. So I'm just curious, when you say specific solutions, it looks like you're distinguishing your solutions in some ways from theirs, and they're more leading edge in certain areas, I guess.
I would put it this way. I think what we had done is, we started with focusing on the BFSI. We, to a large extent, consolidated our position as a BFSI.
I'm sorry, you're using an acronym. I'm sure I should know it.
Yeah,
BFSI?
I'm sorry. Okay. BFSI stands for Banking, Financial Services, and Insurance. So Emphasis started as with the domain expertise and solutions in the banking, financial services, and insurance segment. We then, over a period of time, with the advent of spends happening in the digital world, we are offering solutions on the digital side for virtually, which is, shall we say, sector agnostic. So irrespective whether it is health or it is manufacturing, we offer digital IT solutions. And we feel the IT solutions, the digital solutions are very important in the current era. I think there are enough examples right from Amazon to Uber who are virtually disrupting the market, and that is only through technology. And that is where we are giving solutions to our end clients.
So tell us, what are the key metrics you rely on to reveal how Mphasis is performing today? What are the numbers you're looking at before your first cup of coffee?
Let me also give you the background when I talk about these metrics, because that's very, very relevant. We are a listed company in the Indian Stock Exchange. So the quarterly results are naturally important from an investor perspective. And so clearly revenue growth and EPS, earnings per share growth, is the most important metric which I virtually look at every day to see whether the revenue forecast and how we are going to close the quarter. I mean, there are other metrics naturally across the organization which are equally important, are important, but the final number or the final metric is the revenue growth or the revenue number and the EPS number for the quarter.
We want to ask you for a finance strategic moment, Surya, but before I ask that question, I was wondering if you could reflect on this IT services space for us, because the company before you mentioned EDS. Turn back the clock, and EDS was once a dominant player in this space, and it's gone today. It's management vision. It had this bold, grand vision. So many of these IT services companies have come and gone. What is the vision for Mphasis today? Why will Mphasis be here 10 years from now?
So let me go step by step to answer this because the context is very important. As I mentioned, the IT services industry is going through a major disruption and transformation. The industry started with the IT services vendors servicing what we call as the core applications area of enterprises. And whether it was application development or maintenance or maintaining the underlying infrastructure assets of the company. With the advent of the digital world, and I'll make the digital world very simple, is the interface with enterprises have with their customers becoming digital. It is important the IT vendors or players like us help the enterprises to reach out to their customers at a much more simpler and a digital way. And that is where the shift has happened. Irrespective of what your core applications of the company enterprises were, that is virtually immaterial. You need to pull data out, use cognitive computing or artificial intelligence and data science to service the front-end customer, and so that at a much faster and agile pace. If I go back, there were projects which were given by enterprises to IT services for development of an application for 18 months and 24 months. That does not happen now. You need to develop an app or a solution for the end customer which can be deployed within a month. So that is the change which has happened. And that is where emphasis applies next generation technology, which is to help the enterprises transform businesses globally. As I said, customer centricity is a foundation to not only from emphasis perspective, but what we enable enterprises from their servicing their customers. In fact, many a time, instead of not only interacting with the CIO who manages the IT outsourcing, so to say, we meet the business to understand what their problems are and address their problems by giving solutions. So that is what we call customer centricity and the shift which has happened. As I mentioned, the shift of the enterprises to a more hyper-personalized digital experience to clients is what we are addressing.
Love that hyper-personal connection. Very interesting. So we always ask for a finance strategic moment. You've had so many of these along the way, Surya. It's hard to identify just one, I'm certain. But when you look back over your career, was there a moment where your lines of sight into the organization, those unique lines of sight that only a finance leader truly has, allowed you to see an opportunity, a risk, something that led you to help change the direction of the company, or perhaps just your finance team was repositioned? What comes to mind?
There were naturally many incidents or events in the long career which I've had. But I would also talk about few of them now. One was in Ramco Systems. It was an unlisted, and we were going through a listing in the stock exchange along with a private placement with international investors. And we had made a timetable along with the investment banker, and his timetable was a little stretched one because this had to be done after doing the international roadshow. I pushed, and somewhere knowing the pulse of the exchange and the stock market, we keep reading various reports. There was a feeling that we need to complete this whole listing process at a much faster pace before a particular date. And I pushed for it, and lo and behold, as we listed the company, we got a fantastic valuation on listing, and within a month, the market fell. If I had not, timed it well, we would have missed even the listing and garnering the funds from the international investors. I think, my push to ensure we stick to a very tight timeline helped the organization in a big way. I think the other aspect which I would consider virtually a turning, which helped the organization a lot, as I mentioned, when I started my career in escorts, which was into manufacturing, we used to manufacture motorcycles. The normal focus from finance across the management is to focus on reducing the cost of raw materials. I mean, that's very basic. I felt that we need to focus on the indirect materials, because there are the direct materials are the items which get into the motorcycle. But to get those parts in, there is a lot of indirect material which is used in the shop floor, right from oil to grease to lubricants to various screws and whatnot. And invariably, the organization do not focus there, and that could create a lot of leakage, and you could be spending more money. I started focusing on that in trying to identify what is the spend per motorcycle in indirect material, and that brought in a lot of savings to the organization. With the result, that became a metric in the dashboard, which used to go to the CEO. So I think there are various events, as I mentioned, but I'm calling out two of them which comes to my mind.
One question regarding the timing of the IPO and your role. What was your takeaway there? And I want to, my hunch is that you demonstrated leadership. You pushed for this. You saw something. You thought the timing was best. And as a finance leader, perhaps you think back and know that, it was the power of your voice that made it become a reality.
I think I think one of the very good observation, but I think very important. You need to not keep one line of communication with your advisors. I think that's a very important thing, and that I practice even as of today. If my consultant is talking about a particular opinion or advice, I do not just depend on him. I compare the notes with my peers across the industry, with other consultants whom I have a friendly relationship, to be sure that whatever opinion I'm taking, and accordingly I am going to take action, it's on the right. It is the best possible solution. And that helped me in this particular IPO. I kept my, shall we say, ears to the ground in terms of how the stock market is looking like, and what are the dangers of any fall. It is certainly not possible to predict, but you can get some of the pulses much earlier.
We'll be back when Surya enters the mentoring round. After this leadership minute, where once more I'm on the show floor, I believe at AFP, putting a thought leader on the spot with a single question. But never fear, Surya returns after this. Hello, we're attending AFP's annual conference in Chicago this week, and we're pleased to catch up with Gerald Sethi, Vice President of Product Management for OpenLink Financial, an Ion company. Gerald, hello.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Good to catch up with you. My question is, what should CFOs have top of mind when it comes to trading and risk management in 2019?
Well, I think there's a lot of geopolitical instability that they need to be concerned about. Things like Brexit, things like tariffs that are taking place between the U.S. and Canada, U.S. and China. These are things that can affect supply chain, that can affect the prices of their raw materials, and ultimately their bottom line. And I think this is what they need to be looking towards, understanding the impact.
So some of what you're discussing here comes under scenario planning. Is that right?
Scenario planning, stress testing, that type of thing. So if certain gray swan events, as they're often called, or even black swan events, might figure into their future, they want to be able to model those within their systems if they have the right technology, and sort of foreshadow or forecast what the impacts might be. And that way they can plan for that. They want to look at their supply chains and see how it might impact it if they have to start trading through another country. They might want to see, if let's say they're dealing with raw materials like sugar or oil or petroleum, what would happen if there's a price disruption? How would that impact them?
Gerald Sethi, thank you for answering our questions.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We're going to move to our mentoring round questions, where I get to ask you several quick questions with the intent of inspiring and informing future finance leaders. What's one thing that's exciting you about finance and business today?
I think automation. I think that's the most exciting part, what's happening, or I would call it disrupting finance, in the sense it is very important to bring automation into finance at a much faster pace than what's happening now. And that's going to change the whole, shall we say, the function. So that you have few leaders who just focus on key metrics and guide the organization.
When you think of automation, is there something you want to have your team stop doing? We got to get out of this because I need you people focused over here. If there was just some area of that finance is tasked with right now that you would very much like to just get your people out of.
Yes. So what happens is when there is less of automation or no automation, people spend a lot of time and calculations, and more importantly, validating whether the calculations are right. I think that's all waste of time. If you have standard processes, if you have standard calculations, which are there in any finance organization, just go ahead, automate it.
What do you wish someone had told you at the start of your CFO career? And perhaps we touched upon this earlier when you stepped into the role at Ramco. But what would you tell us? What is that piece of advice you wish someone had supplied you with prior to stepping into that office?
I think I caught it on, but I would say stay close to business. I still feel that's the most important mantra for a CFO.
And by that, how do you do that yourself today? How do you stay close? Are you connecting with people in the different functions? Do you make a point on attending certain meetings that people perhaps are surprised to see you? What does it come down to?
Yes, you are absolutely right. Being virtually, I call the business leaders, we have about 4 of them. I virtually call all of them every day. I'm there on the daily as a standard call with them. And rightly said, get into even sales reviews where certainly it's more of an internal sales review. But I'm there to understand where the business is going and get a feel not only of where we are strong, but also it gives an indication where we might be weak if we feel that we have lost some deal.
Now, do you have curious about your daily routine, and this is more of a personal question. We always ask if you have a personal habit that you believe has contributed to your professional success. Tell us something about yourself that you believe has helped you professionally, but is more of a personal routine or attribute.
I would call it, I try to ensure that I finish all my meals in the weekend. It may not be a very good suggestion, so that the full week I focus on things like what can be helped to enable the business by reviewing the deals which they have and structuring the deals, so that I'm not bogged down by answering mails virtually during the week unless they are very, very critical.
And this is a regiment that you've taken throughout your career, or is this something you arrived at when you realized you had to bring greater structure to your weeks?
I must admit that it happened over a period of time when I realized there were a lot of mails which are when you get caught on in a day-to-day work, your mails start piling up, and so I realized that I need to my day in a normal working day where there is opportunity when you have time to interact with the leaders across the organization. that's not the time one should be spending looking at mails.
Is there a book you'd recommend to aspiring finance leaders today?
I think there are many books, but I think like Good to Great by Jim Collins I'd say, it is again, I try to stress with even my team and, fellow professionals that one needs to be, as a finance professional, domain knowledge is important, but you need to understand the business very well. And how businesses thrive, how businesses succeed or fail, one should be fully aware. And I think the other aspect is you should get the pulse. Ideally the CFO should get the pulse if the business is going to have problems well in advance compared to anyone else in the organization. And that I would consider as the most successful CFO.
Now, I know we're running long. We're up to our final question, but I feel like I overlooked, I think you called them turning points that you mentioned earlier in terms of your career, I think, in terms of mentoring perhaps. Are there moments in your career where mentorship played a key role? Would that be the appropriate question?
I think, as I said, I was quite lucky to have a set of bosses who always guided me and took, I think more importantly, also took advice from me. That gave me a dual sense. One, a sense of importance, and the other sense of being responsible on the advice to be given. So when you give an advice, you need to ensure that it's properly researched and thought out before giving that advice. So that was the other aspect from a mentorship, where they gave me the space for me to contribute.
Interesting. The space. They gave you the freedom to express your concerns or identify opportunities or whatever it may have been.
That's right. And accordingly, what I've done is I have given that same space to my team because I realized if I've been able to be successful, this was one of the important aspects. So if I need my team to be successful, they need that space.
When we come back, we ask Surya for his finance leader priorities over the next 12 months. After this. You want smart, clear, and honest guidance to help you meet the financial goals of your middle market business. With U.S. Bank, you have a partner who will help you find the right solutions to help your organization reduce payment costs, enhance control, improve cash flow, and expand your spend visibility. U.S. Bank's dedication to making ethical decisions and doing the right thing is at the heart of what they do, and their efforts haven't gone unnoticed. They've been named a 2017 World's Most Ethical Company for the third consecutive year by the Ethisphere Institute. To learn more, visit uspayment.com/middlemarket. All right. I've asked such a few more questions. We are running long. I'm going to jump to our final question, which is to finally ask you to look forward for us, which is to say, what are your priorities as the CFO of Mphasis over the next 12 months?
Clearly, we have virtually doubled our valuation in a year. And I would say because investor is the most important aspect for me, apart from other things. So that is the investor return. So I'm looking at ensuring that we are able to focus and double our valuation in a year or two.
Surya, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Hi, it's Jack Sweeney. At CFO Thought Leader, we wanted to give you, the listener, some added clout when it comes to selecting next season's CFO guests. We call it Listener's Choice. And in the months ahead, our Listener's Choice guests will enjoy some added box office clout as we advance the CFOs you most want to hear from into next season's CFO lineup. To learn more about CFO Thought Leader's Listener's Choice, visit us at cfothoughtleader.com or go ahead and email me at jack@cfothoughtleader.com. Hey, one last thing. It's no secret when we originated CFO Thought Leader, it was with iPhone users in mind. Android users, we have neglected you. And so to make amends, we just released a CFO Thought Leader mobile app just for you. It's now ready for download on Google Play and Amazon Android markets. No matter what world you're part of, thank you for listening.